I never thought a noise complaint about my helicopter would end with me draining a lake. But when the Lakewood Heights Homeowners Association decided to play hardball with my perfectly legal heliport, they forgot one crucial detail about the property they all loved so much. My name is Nathan Fletcher, and I bought my estate on Lake Harmony in northern Georgia 3 years ago specifically because it had everything I needed. The previous owner had been an aviation enthusiast who'd gotten the property grandfathered in with a private heliport before the HOA was even established in 1987. When I purchased the place for $3 million, that heliport was explicitly listed in the deed as a permanent easement. The lake itself was interesting too. A man-made creation from the 1950s that sat almost entirely on my 20-acre property, with just a small boat ramp and access road that crossed my land to serve the rest of the community. I ran a consulting business that required me to travel between Atlanta, Chattanooga, and various client sites across the Southeast. The Robinson R-44 helicopter I owned saved me countless hours every week. My flights were always during reasonable hours, between 8 in the morning and 6 in the evening, and I never exceeded the noise ordinances. Everything was legal, documented, and above board. That all changed on a Tuesday morning in March, when I found a certified letter in my mailbox from the Lakewood Heights HOA. The president, a woman named Patricia Morrison, had typed up a formal cease and desist order demanding I stop all helicopter operations immediately. I stood there in my driveway, reading the letter twice to make sure I understood what I was seeing. According to Patricia, the HOA had conducted a community survey and determined that my helicopter operations were disturbing the peace and lowering property values. She cited several HOA bylaws about noise disturbances and claimed that my grandfathered easement was invalid because it predated the current HOA charter from 2003. The letter gave me 10 days to comply or face legal action and daily fines of $500. I called my real estate attorney, David Zimmerman, that same afternoon. He listened to me read the letter over the phone, and I could hear him typing rapidly on his keyboard. "Nathan, this is absolutely absurd," David said. "Your heliport easement is ironclad. It doesn't matter how many times they've rewritten their HOA charter. A grandfathered property easement supersedes any HOA rules. They have no legal standing whatsoever." "So what do?" I asked, pacing around my home office. "Write them back. Be polite but firm. Explain that your heliport is a legal, grandfathered easement that predates the HOA itself. Offer to show them the documentation. If they persist, we'll deal with it in court, and they'll lose badly." I drafted a response that evening, attaching copies of my property deed, the original easement documents from 1985, county permits, and FAA registration. I explained that I sympathized with any concerns about noise, but that I was operating well within all legal parameters. I even offered to meet with the HOA board to discuss the matter civilly. Patricia's response came 3 days later, and this time it wasn't just a letter. She showed up at my front door on a Saturday morning with 2 other board members, clipboard in hand and fury in her eyes. She was exactly what you'd expect. Early 50s, short blonde hair with aggressive highlights, wearing a pantsuit that screamed middle management. The 2 board members flanking her looked uncomfortable, a thin man named Robert Chen and a heavyset woman named Barbara Wexler. "Mr. Fletcher, we received your letter and frankly it changes nothing," Patricia said before I could even say hello. "This community will not tolerate your blatant disregard for our peace and property values. Patricia, I've shown you the legal documents. My heliport is completely legal and grandfathered. "I'm sorry if the noise bothers you, but I'm operating within the law," I replied, trying to keep my voice level. "Your so-called easement is from before most of this community even existed. Times change, Mr. Fletcher. We have families here, children, people who work from home. Your helicopter is a menace and we will not back down." Robert shifted his weight nervously. "Patricia, maybe we should consult with the HOA's lawyer before we—" "I know what I'm talking about, Robert," Patricia snapped. "I've been on this board for 8 years. I know our bylaws inside and out." "Knowing your bylaws doesn't change property law," I said. "I'm not trying to be difficult, but you're asking me to stop using a legal feature of my property that I specifically bought this house for." "Then maybe you should have bought somewhere else," Patricia said coldly. "The HOA board is voting on Monday to begin fining you $500 per day for every day you continue operations. We'll also be filing for an injunction." She turned and walked away before I could respond, her entourage following behind. Barbara gave me an apologetic look over her shoulder, but Robert just stared at his feet. I called David again that evening. "They're going to start fining me and filing for an injunction." "Let them try," David said, and I could hear the confidence in his voice. "Nathan, I want you to document everything. Every flight, every time you speak with them, every letter. Keep meticulous records. When this goes to court, and we'll need everything." That Monday, I received another certified letter. The HOA had voted 4-1 to begin daily fines of $500 for every day I operated my helicopter. The letter stated that I now owed $1,500 for the 3 days I'd flown since their original cease and desist. They'd also filed for a temporary restraining order in Forsyth County Superior Court. I had no choice but to ground my helicopter until the court hearing, which was scheduled for 3 weeks out. Those 3 weeks cost me significant business opportunities. I had to cancel client meetings, rent cars for long drives, and even miss one crucial project deadline because I couldn't get to the site in time. The financial impact was real and growing. During those 3 weeks, something else started happening. I began noticing increased activity on the lake access road that crossed my property. Every weekend, there were dozens of boats launching from the ramp, which sat on a small peninsula that technically belonged to me, but that I'd always allowed the community to use freely. The original property owner had granted an informal access easement for the boat ramp when the lake was created, something the HOA had relied on for decades. I pulled out my property documents and studied them carefully. The boat ramp access was never formally documented as an easement. It was simply a gentleman's agreement, a courtesy extended by previous owners. Unlike my heliport, which was legally protected, the boat ramp access existed purely at my discretion. The court hearing arrived on a Thursday morning in mid-April. Judge Margaret Holloway presided, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who had a reputation for cutting through nonsense. The HOA had hired an attorney named Philip Sterling, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit who clearly thought this would be an easy win. David presented our case methodically. He walked through the property history, showed the original 1985 easement documents, explained the grandfathering laws, and demonstrated that my helicopter operations met all federal, state, and local regulations. He had noise studies showing that my helicopter produced less decibel impact than a lawn mower at the distances to the nearest homes. Philip Sterling's argument essentially boiled down to arguing that times had changed, that the community had grown, and that the HOA had the right to protect property values and quality of life. He presented the community survey showing that 62% of residents were bothered by the helicopter noise. Judge Holloway listened to both sides, asked several pointed questions, and then delivered her ruling. Mr. Sterling, I appreciate your concern for your clients, but the law is quite clear here. Mr. Fletcher's heliport easement predates the HOA and is legally protected. The HOA does not have the authority to override a grandfathered property easement, regardless of community sentiment. The temporary restraining order is denied, and the HOA is ordered to cease all fines against Mr. Fletcher immediately. Furthermore, the HOA will reimburse Mr. Fletcher for his legal fees and any fines already paid. Patricia's face went bright red. She stood up in the gallery. Your Honor, this is outrageous. We have rights as a community. Miss Morrison, please sit down or I'll hold you in contempt, Judge Holloway said sharply. Your community's rights do not extend to violating established property law. This hearing is adjourned. I should have been relieved, but as I walked out of the courthouse, I saw Patricia standing by her Mercedes SUV, phone pressed to her ear, glaring at me with pure hatred. David noticed too. That woman is going to be a problem, he said quietly. Let her try. We won the legal battle, I replied. Sometimes winning the legal battle is just the beginning, David warned. He was right. Over the next 2 weeks, life in Lakewood Heights became increasingly hostile. Someone spray-painted noise polluter on my fence one night. I came home from a flight to find my garbage cans overturned across my driveway. The neighborhood Facebook group, which I wasn't a member of but heard about from my one friendly neighbor Tom Sullivan, was filled with posts about me, calling me selfish, entitled, and worse. Then Patricia escalated. She filed a complaint with the FAA claiming my heliport wasn't properly registered. That triggered a week-long investigation that ultimately concluded everything was in order, but it was another hassle I didn't need. She filed a zoning complaint with the county, claiming my hangar was too tall. Another investigation, another dismissal. She even called the Georgia Environmental Protection Division claiming my helicopter was leaking fuel into the lake, which was completely fabricated. Each false complaint cost me time, money, and stress. I was spending more time defending my legal right to use my own property than actually using it. Tom, my neighbor who lived 3 houses down and had always been friendly, stopped by one evening with a 6-pack of beer. Nathan, I voted against all this HOA nonsense for what it's worth, Tom said as we sat on my back deck overlooking the lake. Patricia's lost her mind. She's making this her personal crusade. I don't understand why she's so obsessed with this, I said, watching the sun set over the water. I won in court, it's over. That's exactly why she's obsessed, Tom explained. Patricia doesn't lose. She's been running this HOA like her personal fiefdom for years. You're the first person who's ever successfully stood up to her. It's eating her alive. So what's her end game? She can't change the law. Tom took a long drink of his beer. I honestly don't know, but I'll tell you this, she's been talking about calling an emergency community meeting to discuss security measures for the lake access. Whatever that means. That got my attention. Security measures? Yeah. She's convinced people that with your helicopter coming and going, we need better control over who accesses community amenities. I think she's going to try to get the HOA to install a gate or something. A gate on my property. To control access to a boat ramp that existed on my land purely by my courtesy. That's when the idea first formed in my mind. I'd been so focused on defending my heliport that I'd never considered offense. But Patricia had just given me the opening I needed. I spent the weekend researching property law with David's help. We pored over every document related to the lake and the boat ramp. The findings were crystal clear. The lake had been created in 1952 when the original landowner dammed a creek. Over the decades, different pieces of the surrounding property had been sold off, but the lake itself and the boat ramp remained on what became my parcel. The informal access arrangement had existed for so long that everyone simply assumed it was a legal easement. But assumptions aren't legal documents. There was no recorded easement for the boat ramp, no legal agreement, nothing binding. I'd been allowing access purely out of courtesy, continuing a tradition started by previous owners. "You could revoke their access," David said slowly when we reached the conclusion together. "Legally, you'd be within your rights. But should I asked. "That's going to hurt a lot of innocent people." "Nathan, let me ask you something. How many of those innocent people have defended you? How many spoke up when Patricia was launching her crusade? How many voted against the fines?" I thought about it. According to the vote records, only one board member had voted against fining me. The community survey showed 62% wanted my helicopter grounded. Tom was friendly, but how many others had stood up for what was right? "They elected Patricia and that board," David continued. "They voted to fine you. They supported her harassment campaign. At some point, there are consequences for those choices." The emergency HOA meeting happened the following Tuesday evening at the community clubhouse. I wasn't planning to attend, but Tom convinced me it would be wise to at least observe. The room was packed, at least 80 people crammed into a space meant for 50. Patricia stood at the front, looking triumphant despite her legal losses. "Thank you all for coming," Patricia began. "As you know, we've been dealing with ongoing disturbances from a certain resident who refuses to be a good neighbor. While the courts have temporarily sided with him, we as a community have the right to protect ourselves and our property values." The way she said, "temporarily," made my jaw clench. She was still planning to fight this somehow. "Therefore, the board is proposing several measures," Patricia continued. "First, we're implementing a community watch program to monitor and document noise violations. Every helicopter flight will be recorded, timed, and measured. If there's any violation, even a minor one, we'll be back in court." There were murmurs of approval from the crowd. Patricia smiled and continued. "Second, we're implementing new security protocols for our lake access. We'll be installing a coded gate at the entrance to the boat ramp access road. Only residents in good standing with the HOA will receive the code. This will ensure our community amenities are used only by those who respect our community standards." That was it. That was the line she just crossed. My hands gripped the edge of my chair. Tom leaned over and whispered, "She can't do that. That's your property." "I know," I whispered back. "Third," Patricia said, building momentum, "we're increasing HOA dues by 15% to cover our legal expenses and ongoing actions to protect our community. Some residents may think they can bully us with expensive lawyers, but we will not back down." A hand went up in the middle of the room. It was Barbara Wexler, one of the board members who'd come to my door with Patricia. "Patricia, I'm concerned about the gate installation. Have we verified that we have the legal right to install a gate on the access road?" Patricia's smile tightened. "The access road serves community property, Barbara. Of course we have the right to secure it." "But doesn't the access road cross Nathan Fletcher's property?" Barbara pressed. "I've been looking at the original property maps, and I'm not sure we have. Barbara, if you're not prepared to support this board's decisions, perhaps you should reconsider your position," Patricia interrupted coldly. "We have an informal easement that's existed for decades. That's sufficient." "Informal easements aren't legally binding," I said loudly from the back of the room. Everyone turned to look at me. I stood up. "And you don't have my permission to install anything on my property." Patricia's face flushed. "This is a closed HOA meeting, Mr. Fletcher. You're not welcome here." "Actually, HOA meetings are required to be open to all residents under Georgia law, I said calmly. And I am a resident whether you like it or not. But that's beside the point. You cannot install a gate on my property without my permission, which you don't have and won't get. The access road is community property, Patricia insisted. No, it's not. It crosses my property. The boat ramp is on my property. The lake is almost entirely on my property. You've been using all of it by courtesy, not by right. If you want to check, I'm happy to show you the property survey. The room erupted in noise. People were shouting questions, arguing with each other, demanding to see documents. Patricia banged a gavel on the podium. This meeting is adjourned. Everyone out. Now. I left the clubhouse with dozens of angry eyes following me. Tom caught up with me in the parking lot. Nathan, what are you going to do? He asked urgently. What I should have done weeks ago, I said. I'm going to stop being the nice guy who lets people walk all over him. The next morning, I called a surveyor and had them mark the exact boundaries of my property with highly visible stakes and orange tape. The boundary line ran right across the middle of the access road, about 50 feet before the boat ramp. I then hired a fencing company and ordered a custom gate to be installed at that exact spot, complete with a coded lock system. While the survey was being conducted, Patricia showed up in her Mercedes, practically skidding into my driveway. She jumped out, her face contorted with rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she screamed. "I'm marking my property boundaries," I said calmly. "Since you seem confused about where your rights end and mine begin, I thought a visual aid might help. You can't block the lake access. This community has used that boat ramp for 40 years. By courtesy, not by right. You made it very clear at last night's meeting that you intend to install gates and restrict access on my property. So I'm installing my own gate, on my actual property. This is illegal. This is extortion. Actually, it's neither. I'm simply exercising my legal property rights just like you claim to be doing. The difference is mine are actually supported by law." Patricia's hands were shaking. "You can't do this. I'll sue you. The HOA will sue you. We'll bury you in legal fees. Go ahead." My attorney would love another easy win. But let me make something very clear, Patricia. You've spent months harassing me, filing false complaints, vandalizing my property, and trying to prevent me from using my legal heliport. You've cost me business, time, and peace of mind. You lost in court, but instead of accepting that loss gracefully, you've doubled down. So now there are consequences. The entire community needs that boat ramp. Then maybe the entire community should have thought about that before voting to fine me $500 a day for using my legal heliport. Maybe they should have thought about it before supporting your harassment campaign. Actions have consequences, Patricia. You taught me that. She stood there, trembling with rage, unable to form words. Finally, she spun around and drove off, tires squealing. The fence company arrived 3 days later and installed a beautiful custom gate right across the access road. It was solid steel, 8 feet tall with an electronic keypad lock. I was the only person with the code. The boat ramp was now completely inaccessible to everyone but me. My phone started ringing off the hook within hours. I ignored most calls, but I did answer when Tom called. "Nathan, people are losing their minds," Tom said. "The lake access is huge for this community. People have boats, jet skis, fishing gear. Summer's coming. You're going to have a riot on your hands." Then they should ask Patricia why she thought declaring war on me was a good idea, I replied. Most of these people weren't involved in the HOA drama. They just live here. They voted for that HOA board. They supported the actions against me, or at least didn't oppose them. I'm sorry, Tom, but I'm done being understanding. Over the next week, the situation escalated dramatically. I received dozens of emails, letters, and messages ranging from pleading to threatening. Several people offered to pay me for access codes. Others threatened legal action. Patricia sent an official HOA letter demanding I remove the gate within 24 hours or face fines. I sent her response back through David. It was simple. The HOA has no authority over Mr. Fletcher's private property. Any fines levied will be countered with a lawsuit for harassment. Mr. Fletcher suggests the HOA focus its energy on serving its community rather than attacking residents who exercise their legal rights. 2 weeks after I installed the gate, Patricia made another move. I came home from a business trip to find a county code enforcement officer waiting at my house. He was a tired-looking man in his 50s named Carl Hendricks. "Mr. Fletcher, I need to talk to you about your fence installation," Carl said apologetically. "We received a complaint that you didn't pull a permit." "For a gate on my own property?" I asked. "That's what I told them," Carl said, pulling out a tablet. "But I have to follow up on complaints. Can you show me the gate?" We drove down to the access road in his county truck. Carl examined the gate, took some measurements, and made notes. "This is a nice installation," Carl said. "Professional work. But look, Mr. Fletcher, I'm going to be straight with you. You needed a permit for this. It's blocking a road even if it's a private road on your property." "Nothing major, just a minor violation. You'll need to file for a retroactive permit, pay a small fee, maybe $200. I'll give you 30 days. "That's fair," I said. "I honestly didn't know, but I'll handle it." Carl hesitated. "Off the record, is this about that HOA mess?" "I've heard things." "Completely about that HOA mess," I confirmed. Carl shook his head. "Patricia Morrison filed 18 different complaints against various residents last year. 18. She's a nightmare. Most of them were garbage, but we have to investigate every one. You're not winning any popularity contests with this gate, but legally, from what I understand, you're in the right." "Doesn't feel great being right," I admitted. "Never does," Carl said. "But sometimes people need to learn that actions have consequences. Good luck, Mr. Fletcher." I filed for the retroactive permit the next day. It was approved within a week. The gate was now completely legal, properly documented, and utterly immovable from a regulatory standpoint. Memorial Day weekend arrived at the end of May, traditionally the biggest lake weekend of the year for Lakewood Heights. In past years, the boat ramp would be packed from dawn until dusk with families launching boats, kids on tubes, jet skis racing around. This year, the boat ramp sat empty behind my locked gate. I was working in my home office on Saturday morning when I heard car horns outside. I looked out my window to see a line of vehicles with boat trailers stretching down the access road, at least 20 of them. People were getting out of their cars, walking up to the gate, examining it, taking pictures. My doorbell rang. I opened it to find a delegation of 5 residents, none of whom I recognized. A middle-aged man in a polo shirt spoke first. "Mr. Fletcher, I'm Dennis Palmer. We'd like to talk to you about the lake access situation." "Come in," I said, stepping aside. They filed into my living room, looking around nervously. Dennis seemed to be the spokesperson. "Look, we know there's been conflict between you and the HOA," Dennis began. "We're not here to take sides on that, but we're hoping you might be willing to grant access to the lake for this weekend. We have families visiting, plans made. We'll pay you whatever's fair." "How much did you know about the HOA's actions against me?" I asked. Dennis shifted uncomfortably. "We knew there was a dispute about your helicopter. Did you know they fined me $500 a day illegally? Did you know Patricia filed false complaints with the FAA, the county, and the EPA? Did you know someone spray painted my fence and vandalized my property?" Silence. Did any of you vote against the board members who did this? I continued. More silence. Finally, a woman in the group spoke up. Her name was Jennifer, and she looked embarrassed. We didn't vote at all, Jennifer admitted. The HOA elections have terrible turnout. Usually only about 20% of residents participate. Patricia and her allies win by default because nobody else runs or votes. That information hit differently than I expected. These weren't malicious people. They were just apathetic, disconnected from the governance of their own community. They'd allowed Patricia to run wild because they couldn't be bothered to participate. Here's my offer, I said. I'll give you access for this weekend. Free. But when the next HOA election happens, I expect every single one of you to vote. And I expect you to recruit candidates to run against Patricia's board. This community needs leadership that serves residents, not personal vendettas. That's it, Dennis asked, surprised. You'll open the gate for this weekend. After that, we'll see. I want Patricia Morrison removed from power. I want a HOA board that respects property rights and treats residents fairly. Help me make that happen, and the lake stays accessible. Keep letting Patricia run things, and the gate stays closed. They agreed eagerly. I gave them a temporary access code that would work through Monday evening. Word spread quickly, and by noon, the boat ramp was bustling with activity. I even walked down there in the afternoon, curious to see the scene. Families were everywhere, kids splashing in the water, adults grilling on portable barbecues near the ramp area. A few people recognized me and waved, some even thanked me. It was the most interaction I'd had with my neighbors in months that didn't involve hostility. Tom found me watching from the tree line. That was a good move, he said. People are talking. Not everyone agrees with Patricia, you know. They just felt powerless to stop her. Nobody's powerless, I said. They just have to care enough to act. Patricia's going to blow a gasket when she finds out you opened the gate. I'm counting on it. Tom was right. Sunday morning, Patricia showed up at my door again, this time with Robert Chen in tow. Robert looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. You opened the gate, Patricia said accusingly. Temporarily, yes. For the holiday weekend, I replied. You can't just open and close access on a whim. People need reliability. You're absolutely right. That's why I'm proposing something to the HOA. I'll grant a permanent access easement for the boat ramp, properly documented and legally binding, on 3 conditions. Patricia's eyes narrowed. What conditions? First, the HOA formally apologizes for the illegal fines and harassment campaign against me. Second, the HOA reimburses me for all legal fees and business losses incurred defending my heliport rights. Third, you resign as HOA president. Never, Patricia spat. I will never resign. This community needs me. Then the community can figure out how to access the lake somewhere else, I said simply. Those are my terms. Robert finally spoke up. Patricia, maybe we should bring this to the full board. These terms are reasonable considering their blackmail, Patricia shouted. And I won't negotiate with terrorists. Terrorists, I laughed. Patricia, I'm a resident exercising my property rights. You're the one who declared war. I'm just offering peace terms. She stormed off again. Robert lingered for a moment. She's not going to resign, Robert said quietly. I know. But now the community knows what it'll take to get lake access back. That information will spread. Let's see what happens, I replied. What happened was interesting. Over the next 2 weeks, I started receiving visits from various community members. Some wanted to negotiate. Others wanted to share information about Patricia's history of abuse. I learned that she'd driven out 3 families over the years with targeted harassment campaigns over minor HOA violations. She'd blocked improvements to common areas that she personally didn't like. She'd even been accused of embezzling HOA funds, though nothing was ever proven. The community was fracturing. A Facebook group called Lakewood Heights Reform sprang up with over 100 members calling for HOA leadership changes. Petitions circulated demanding a special election. Patricia's allies fought back hard, claiming I was manipulating people and destroying community unity. Then something unexpected happened. Barbara Wexler, the board member who'd questioned Patricia's authority at the meeting, resigned from the board and filed a formal complaint with the HOA alleging financial improprieties. She'd been the treasurer and claimed that Patricia had been using HOA funds for personal legal fees unrelated to community business. This triggered an investigation by a forensic accountant hired by concerned residents. I stayed out of that entirely, but Tom kept me updated. The accountant found that over $12,000 in HOA funds had been spent on Patricia's personal legal matters over the past 2 years, including a property line dispute with her own neighbor and a lawsuit against a contractor who'd worked on her house. The findings were released to the community in mid-June. The reaction was explosive. Even Patricia's strongest allies couldn't defend stealing from the HOA. An emergency meeting was called, this one truly packed with over 150 residents, some standing outside listening through the windows. I attended this meeting, sitting in the back again. Patricia tried to defend herself, claiming the expenses were legitimate because they involved community safety and protecting property values. But nobody was buying it. Residents shouted questions and accusations. The meeting devolved into chaos. Finally, a lawyer in the community named Michelle Torres stood up and took control. "This meeting is out of order. According to our HOA bylaws, we need a formal vote of no confidence. I'm making that motion now." I move for the immediate removal of Patricia Morrison as HOA president for financial misconduct and misappropriation of funds. Second, at least a dozen voices shouted. Patricia banged her gavel. "This is irregular. You can't just—" "Actually, she can," Michelle said firmly. "It's in our bylaws, Section 7, Article 3. All in favor of removing Patricia Morrison as president, raise your hands." A sea of hands went up. It wasn't even close. Patricia looked around the room in shock, her face pale. All opposed. Maybe 10 hands raised, and some of those looked hesitant. The motion passes. Patricia Morrison is removed as HOA president effective immediately. We'll need to hold nominations for a replacement. Patricia stood there for a long moment, then grabbed her things and walked out without a word. The room erupted in applause and relieved chatter. Michelle Torres was nominated and elected as interim president that same night. Her first act was to approach me after the meeting. "Mr. Fletcher, on behalf of this community, I apologize for how you've been treated," Michelle said, extending her hand. "The previous board acted inappropriately and illegally. We'd like to make this right." "I appreciate that," I said, shaking her hand. "I reviewed your terms for the lake access easement. They're reasonable. Can we discuss the details?" Over the next week, we negotiated a formal agreement. The HOA would grant a formal written apology that would be entered into the permanent record and posted on the community website. They would reimburse me $8,000 for legal fees, which was less than I'd actually spent but felt fair. And Patricia was already gone, so that condition was met. In exchange, I would grant a permanent, recorded easement for lake access across my property. The easement would specify reasonable terms: access during daylight hours, no littering, maintenance of the boat ramp to be handled by the HOA, and a clause that if the HOA ever attempted to restrict my legal property rights again, the easement would be void. The agreement was signed in early July. I had the gate removed the same day. That weekend, the lake was full again, back to the way it should be. I flew my helicopter to a client meeting in Chattanooga and came home to find a basket of baked goods on my doorstep with a thank you note from the Torres family. But the story wasn't quite over. In late July, I received a call from the Forsyth County District Attorney's office. Patricia Morrison had been charged with theft by taking for misappropriating HOA funds. The forensic accountant's report had been forwarded to law enforcement, and they'd found enough evidence to prosecute. The case went to trial in October. I was called as a witness to describe Patricia's harassment campaign and to establish a pattern of behavior. I testified honestly about the illegal fines, the false complaints, and the sustained effort to prevent me from using my legal property rights. Patricia's defense attorney tried to paint her as a dedicated community volunteer who'd made some accounting errors. But the forensic accountant's testimony was damning. The financial records showed deliberate, repeated transfers of HOA funds to pay for personal legal matters. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on 3 counts of theft by taking. The judge sentenced her to 2 years of probation, community service, and ordered her to repay the $12,000 plus penalties. She also received a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in Georgia. I saw her one last time in the courthouse hallway after sentencing. She looked diminished, defeated. She saw me and stopped. "I hope you're happy," she said bitterly. "I'm not happy about any of this, Patricia," I said honestly. "I just wanted to use my property legally. You could have let it go after the court ruled in my favor. Instead, you escalated. You committed crimes. That's on you, not me." "I was protecting the community," she insisted weakly. "You were protecting your ego. There's a difference." She walked away without responding. I never saw her again. Life in Lakewood Heights slowly returned to normal over the following months. Michelle Torres proved to be an excellent HOA president, focused on actual community improvement rather than power trips. They repaved the common area parking lot, organized neighborhood events, and even installed a nice pavilion near the boat ramp with picnic tables. Tom and I became good friends, often fishing together on the lake on weekends. Other neighbors warmed up to me too, once they realized I was just a regular guy who wanted to live peacefully and do my job. My helicopter operations continued without incident. I still flew between 8 and 6, still followed all regulations, and still maintained my Robinson R-44 meticulously. Sometimes kids would watch from their yards when I took off or landed, waving excitedly. I'd wave back. The lake remained beautiful and accessible. On summer evenings, I'd sit on my deck and watch families enjoying the water, boats cutting across the surface, the sun setting over the Georgia hills. It was exactly the life I'd bought this property for. The whole experience taught me something valuable about standing up for yourself. I'd spent weeks trying to be reasonable, trying to compromise, trying to avoid conflict. But some people interpret kindness as weakness. Sometimes you have to draw hard lines and defend them, even when it's uncomfortable. I also learned about community responsibility. The residents of Lakewood Heights had allowed Patricia to run unchecked for years because they couldn't be bothered to participate in their own governance. That apathy had real consequences. When they finally engaged, when they finally paid attention and took action, things improved dramatically. The easement I granted was worth it, not because I needed the community's approval, but because it was the right thing to do once they'd made things right. The lake should be accessible. Communities should share resources. But those privileges come with responsibilities, including respecting each other's rights and holding leaders accountable. My business thrived. Without the constant legal battles and harassment, I could focus on my work. The helicopter saved me countless hours and allowed me to take on clients across a wider geographic area. The convenience was worth every penny I'd spent defending my right to use it. In December, the HOA held their annual holiday party at the clubhouse. I almost didn't go, but Tom convinced me. When I walked in, Michelle Torres spotted me immediately and called for everyone's attention. "I want to take a moment to thank Nathan Fletcher," Michelle announced. "I know this year had its rough patches, but Nathan stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult. He also showed us that strong property rights and community spirit aren't mutually exclusive. Thanks to his generosity, we still have access to our beautiful lake. Let's give him a hand." The applause was genuine and warm. People came up to shake my hand, thank me personally, share stories about their families enjoying the lake. It felt good, being part of a community again rather than fighting against it. As the party wound down and I was heading out, a young couple stopped me. They just moved into the neighborhood a few months earlier. "Mr. Fletcher, we heard about everything that happened before we moved here," the husband said. "We just wanted you to know, we voted in the HOA election and will keep voting. What happened to you shouldn't happen to anyone." "I appreciate that," I said, "and welcome to the neighborhood." Driving home that night, I thought about how close I'd come to selling the property and moving during the worst of the conflict. I'd even called a real estate agent at one point, ready to list it, but I'm glad I stayed and fought. Running away from bullies just empowers them to bully the next person. My property remained my sanctuary. The heliport sat ready whenever I needed it, the Robinson R44 secured in its hangar. The lake stretched out behind my house, peaceful and beautiful. The access road now had a small sign that read "Lake Access Easement Granted by Fletcher Property," with the date and legal description. It was a reminder that access was a privilege, not a right, and that privileges should be respected. Sometimes I'd fly over Lakewood Heights on my way to or from a client meeting, looking down at the neighborhood from 1,000 feet up. I'd see the lake, the houses, the boats in driveways, the common areas. From up there, it looked peaceful and orderly. You couldn't see the conflicts or the history or the complications of people trying to live together in a planned community. But I knew the truth. Communities are complicated, messy, and sometimes ugly. They require work, attention, and people willing to do the right thing even when it's hard. They require standing up to bullies and holding leaders accountable. They require balancing individual rights with collective needs. I'd learned all of that the hard way, through months of conflict and thousands of dollars in legal fees. But I'd also learned that standing firm on principle, even when the whole community seems against you, is sometimes the right call. Laws exist for a reason. Property rights matter, and people who abuse power need to face consequences. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway, the garage door rolling up automatically. It was a potential new client in Nashville, asking about my availability for a consultation. I looked at my helicopter through the hangar window, ready and waiting. "I can be there tomorrow afternoon," I said. 2 o'clock work for you?" "Perfect," the client said. I ended the call and smiled. This was exactly why I'd fought so hard for my heliport rights. This was the life I'd built, the freedom I'd protected, the principle I'd defended. It was worth it. The next morning dawned clear and beautiful, perfect flying weather. I did my pre-flight inspection carefully, checking every system and surface. The Robinson R44 was in perfect condition, well-maintained and reliable. I filed my flight plan, checked the weather one more time, and started the engine. As the rotors spun up and I lifted off my property, rising above the trees and the lake and the houses of Lakewood Heights, I felt that familiar sense of freedom and possibility. The whole southeast spread out before me, accessible and open. This was what I'd fought for. This was what mattered. Below me, I could see a few boats already on the lake despite the early hour, fishermen taking advantage of the morning calm. Someone waved from their boat, maybe recognizing my helicopter. I dipped my nose slightly in acknowledgement and turned north toward Nashville. The community below continued its daily life, better governed now, more engaged, more aware of the consequences of apathy and the importance of good leadership. And I continued mine, flying where I needed to go, using my property as I had every right to do, living the life I'd chosen in the place I'd chosen. Sometimes the hardest thing about being right is having the courage to stand alone when everyone else is wrong. But standing alone is easier when you know the law is on your side and you're fighting for something that matters. I'd stood alone, fought my battles, won my wars, and came out the other side with my rights intact and my community improved. That, more than anything, was worth celebrating. Not the conflict, not the victory, but the principle defended, and the community improved through the hard work of standing firm when it would have been easier to give in. That's what makes a community strong, not blind obedience to bad leadership, but the willingness to fight for what's right even when the fight is difficult. As I climbed to cruise altitude and settled in for the flight to Nashville, I felt at peace in a way I hadn't in months. The war was over. The battles were won. Life was good, and my helicopter hummed smoothly beneath me, carrying me forward into whatever came next.